Welcome to Agility Awakenings podcast, where I interact with great thought leaders, explore the holistic view of agility, and finding ways to understand the system's dynamics better. Today, we are talking about psychological safety and systems thinking with Tom Geraghty, the founder and CEO of Item Limited, focused on safety cultures and psychological safety as a mediator of organizational performance. Through working with teams in industries ranging from technology and healthcare to aviation and government, he helps build the capacity and practice to foster greater psychological safety in teams and across organizations. Tom's background is in scientific research before moving into technology and CAO CTO roles. His mission is to make the world of work a safer, higher performing, more inclusive and equitable place. Outside of work, Tom spends as much time as possible outdoors and is studying for a master's degree in global health and humanitarianism. Hello, Tom. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah. So thank you so much for coming on the show, and I'm really excited to talk to you about psychological safety.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me on. I'm really honored to join you. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, so when I was just exploring about psychological safety, I came across your wonderful forum, Psychsafety. So could you just tell more about the inspiring journey of Psychsafety?
Yeah. So, where to start? I could start really far back, but no, I won't go too far back. So let's say around 15-ish years ago, I experienced a work culture. So my background is in technology. I experienced a work culture that was very fear-driven, very, very sort of managed by fear. So my boss at the time believed that team performance and group performance was enhanced by a fear of punishment for mistakes. That if we feared making mistakes, then we wouldn't make mistakes, and if there were consequences for low quality, then we would reach high quality. That sort of culture, and he did this by openly blaming people for mistakes, coming into the room and coming into the office and ripping people apart for minor little mistakes. And this, and that, when I told this story, I sometimes make him sound like a really horrible person, but he wasn't. He believed, and it's fairly natural to believe this because we've been kind of taught this over a century or so. He believed that that was the way to reach a high performing team state, like really, really deep accountability and punishment for mistakes and consequences for failure. But in fact, I saw that it had the opposite effect. It meant people slowed down. They didn't take any risks. They didn't take any chances. Instead of trying to do basic tasks, they would spend 2 weeks planning just a very simple task, and just so that if it went wrong, they could say, "Well, look, I spent 2 weeks planning it." So everything was a covering exercise. From then, I sort of said to myself, right, if that's the bad way of doing things, then the opposite of that must be the good way of doing things. And through that journey, I then learned about different practices, different behaviors, different theories, and then a few years later learned about the term psychological safety, and that was my light bulb moment. That was the moment where I thought, this is what I've been trying to do. This is the stuff. This is how all this comes together. I'm trying to create a culture of psychological safety, and that's the key to performance. And that was where I began to put all my resources and sort of learning together into one place, which is psychsafety.com.
That's a really fantastic forum. You can just learn more about psychological safety, why psychological safety is needed, and how to do that. So, but there are various definitions about psychological safety because people having different interpretations. So maybe could you just define in simple terms about what is psychological safety?
Yeah, so you're right. There are a number of definitions, and I don't think there's any sort of like official definition. But I think there are some that are more commonly used than others, and some that are more useful than others. And so, both of them, in my mind, come from Amy Edmondson's fantastic work. One is so the more academic definition, if you like, is that the team is safe for interpersonal risk taking. The belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk taking. Now that's great. That is, that's true. I get that. But a potentially more useful definition, which is still from Amy Edmonton's work, is that a psychological safety is the belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. And I think that's really powerful, because all we really have to remember then are these ideas, is this idea of ideas, questions, concerns, and mistakes. If we can remember those four things, is it safe to speak up with ideas, raise ideas? Is it safe to raise concerns? Is it safe to admit your mistakes? And is it safe to ask questions? If it's safe to do those things, or some of those things, psychological safety, after all, is a spectrum, or sort of a big, like, malleable, nebulous thing. You might be safe to admit a mistake but not ask a question, for example. Then that's what psychological safety is. That's what we're striving for. And so I think that's probably the more useful definition.
Wow, that's a really great definition, Tom. So people know that psychological safety is very important for high-performing teams. But why it is important, and how we know that the team is psychologically safe?
So we know it's important. I mean, this is a really interesting thing, because one of the reasons I think psychological safety has become so popular, the term, the idea has become so popular and really grabbed people over the past few years, couple of years even, is that we all instinctively, intrinsically know that feeling psychologically safe is good. Like, it makes us feel good. It helps us feel less stressed. It helps us enjoy ourselves and be ourselves at work, and that's a good thing. Like, it's a moral good, right? It's an ethical, moral good to feel psychologically safe at work. It also leads to better team and group outcomes, right? It also leads to higher team performance, and we can see this, through, it's a fairly straightforward mechanism through, if we're able to surface ideas, suggest ideas, admit our mistakes, then we're able to implement those ideas or try them out. If we're able to admit our mistakes, we're able to do something about them and prevent them happening in the future. That's the mechanism by which it works. And whilst there's an awful lot of academic research over the past couple of decades that have gone into this, but one of the most well-known industry pieces of research is Google's Project Aristotle, which shows the sort of various foundations of group performance, from things like clarity to dependability and things like that. But they show that the foundation of team performance is psychological safety, i.e., a team will never be truly high performing as they could be, no matter how good they are at all the other things. They will never reach that potential state without a culture, without a context of psychological safety, without that foundation in place. So that's, so I like to say that psychological safety is the right thing to do. It has this fantastic side effect that it's also commercially and organizationally the sensible right thing to do, right? It makes organizations more successful as well.
So there is a huge difference between psychological safety and safe space. So could you just explain what is the exact difference between these two terms?
Yeah, so this is a really good question. I think there's a lot of confusion, a lot of misunderstanding or misapprehension around these terms, and justifiably so, because they're very similar. And I should also say, I'm not the authority on this. It's just my sort of stance. So I'm fully open for people to challenge me on this. So I like to distinguish psychological safety from a safe space, because psychological safety is about feeling free, feeling open to suggest ideas, raise concerns, and challenge each other in the group productively towards a better outcome, right? So we're trying. The aim of this group is to achieve a certain outcome, whether that's winning a football match or a cricket match, or saving people's lives in a hospital, or delivering great software, right? Whatever the team target, goal, outcome is, that's in the context of psychological safety, that's what we're trying to achieve. We're focusing on that goal. In a safe space, we don't have that goal necessarily. We're not necessarily a goal-oriented space. We're in a space where we come to shelter, we come to retreat and care for each other. So in a safe space, as a safe space may be, for example, an Alcoholics Anonymous group. It may be a domestic abuse survivors group. It may be a group for a particular set of people who experience a certain set of challenges. Maybe that's, let's say, Black women in the workplace group. So this safe space is designed so that we can talk openly about our feelings and concerns, and what we're going through and what we're experiencing, and support each other. But we're not necessarily going to challenge each other in the same ways that we would in a team context, because we're not there for that. We're there to feel. We're there to refill our batteries, to take a rest, to take a break from whatever's going on out there. And often a safe space, quite often a safe space will actually be designed to exclude others, or rather include only a certain group of people, i.e., let's say an Alcoholics Anonymous group. It is there for people who are alcoholics or who are recovering alcoholics. It's not just open to everyone. A group for domestic abuse survivors is designed for those people, and whereas a psychologically safe team, we're talking about a psychologically safe context, a team context. We don't want to exclude anyone from that group. We want to make sure that everyone feels included and everyone can be part of the team and be challenged. So they're very different contexts, they're very different uses, and applying the practices of one to the practices of another probably really isn't useful. Probably wouldn't work, frankly. Psychological safety may be a useful thing to talk about in a safe space context. But the sort of applications and contexts are very, very different in my mind. Yeah. And I think the challenging each other is a key point there, because in a safe space, in a space where we're going to retreat and recharge and survive and stuff like that, we may want to be challenged. We may not want to be challenged, and we may in that space actually say, I just want to talk. I just want to open up and talk, and I don't want to be challenged. I'm not here to be challenged at this time. I'm not in a state where I'm able to be challenged, or I just need to go through this before I can be challenged. Whereas in a psychologically safe team, it is all about challenge and productive debate and productive, positive, respectful conflict.
Yeah. It means like constructive conflicts, maybe we can say, so that that's a source for innovation and also creativity.
Yeah.
So psychological safety, we know that it is very important, and that's a space people express their views. But practically, how we can create a psychological safe environment? Is there any structure involved? Maybe you can just share some insights about how to create a psychological safe environment.
Yeah, so I think this is where the rubber hits the road, right? This is where it gets hard, where the work starts. And I think one of the things I like to do is separate the idea of behaviors and practices, right? Because behaviors are those things that we do, that are sort of the undercurrent, the constant, constantly improving, frequent kind of interactions and how we work together. Practices are some of the things that we might do that have, like, they're time bounded. They're like, a thing starts and a thing finishes and it has a name. So a practice might be the andon chord, for example. It might be retrospectives or something else. Behaviors, on the other hand, are things that we always do. So it might be sort of being open to feedback, reflecting on past failures, admitting our mistakes, thinking out loud, working with intent, and things like that. And so there's, we could talk about 100 or 1,000 different types of behaviors that we could build into a team, we could adopt as a team. We could talk about loads of different practices that might be suitable for a team. What's interesting in psychological safety terms is that, so psychological safety is kind of ubiquitous across all contexts, right? So we maintain and build and foster psychological safety in aviation. So in an aircraft with the pilot and co-pilot and crew, it's really important to have psychological safety in an aircraft so that someone can point out the engine's on fire, or you've forgotten to raise the flaps, or whatever it is. Really important in a surgical context, in a clinical context. It's important in a software development context, or any other context. Some of those behaviors and some of those practices will be ubiquitous across all those different domains and contexts. Some of them won't be. Some of the contexts, some of the practices that we might employ in the clinical world won't necessarily make sense in a different context. They might, or they might use some adaptation and tweaking. So this is where it gets interesting, because I think we can learn from these different contexts, but we also have to recognize what's important for us, what's critical for our team and our context this time, because we evolve and change over time as well. And so this is why, there are sort of frameworks, there are sort of ways to, there's lots of stuff out there about like how to create psychological safety in your team. And it's all really good stuff, but it can sometimes feel a bit generic. And because it's either got to apply to all contexts, all over the world, different cultures, different languages, different practices, or it's got to apply to that team, that specific team, that specific Norwegian surgical team who are working in a certain hospital in a certain way. That's, and so what I like to come back to is that a lot of these things rely on the team to talk about those behaviors and those practices. What are we going to come up with? So I come back to a lot of the time to things like personal README files, personal user manuals rather. So actually talking about how we want to work together and what our preferences are, how we prefer to work, what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are, what I'm working on, what my personal goals are. We can extrapolate that and make that wider to things like team charters and social contracts. And this is where it becomes really powerful, because getting back to the point about psychological safety, an awful lot about psychological safety is about predictability. It's about being able to predict, because this is a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated, right? So psychological safety is about predictability, a lot of it. Being able to predict, if I say or do this in the group, this will be how it's received, or at least I will not be punished or humiliated. It's predicting that with a great deal of confidence. Which is why it's difficult to have psychological safety in a brand new team, because we don't know anything about the team yet. We don't know what that reception will be like. What we can do, of course, is take a bit of a shortcut. We can engineer ourselves a little bit closer to that state by creating things like social contracts and team charters that make the previously implicit explicit. And this should evolve over time as well, right? So what we're doing here is we're defining what is acceptable and what is good within the team and how we will react and respond to each other. This is also really powerful when we've got diverse teams across different geographies, different contexts, different nationalities, and different cultures, because we don't often talk about the differences that creates in these teams. The way a sales team in the USA will interact with each other were very different to a software development team in Germany, for example. First of all, different languages, right? But secondly, they're different practices, different ways of interacting, different tones, different interactions. And so making that explicit, saying this is how we're going to interact, this is how we're going to reflect, this is how, even down to basic stuff like this is, just deciding we will always turn up to meetings on time, or this is our dress code. Even things like dress code, it might not be important. Maybe it is important. Maybe it's important just to say we have no dress code, and so that people will understand and can predict what it's like in that group. And over time, that will really help build psychological safety, because it's helping create that scaffold, that predictability of what it's like to be on that team. Plus, it's really important to come back and revisit that, reevaluate and change it and evolve it over time, because something that we put in, we may find isn't actually useful, or actually maybe is harmful. Maybe we need to change it in some way. But it also means that if someone on the group sort of goes outside those boundaries, maybe part of our social contract is that we always turn up to meetings on time, or even better, maybe it's that we don't talk over each other in meetings, and someone on the team always talks over other people. That having that social contract in place means it's a lot easier and a lot more constructive and a lot less awkward and kind of scary to address that behavior, because we can say, oh, by the way, we wrote this in a social contract, so let's make sure we all adhere to the social contract, because it's a rule for everyone, not just and so social contracts and team charters mean that we're able to it's bringing people back into those sort of boundaries of behavior. It doesn't feel like pointing the finger anymore. And it means that we have that scaffold for doing so, and that helps foster psychological safety for the group and for the people who sort of need to be brought back in, because it helps them understand where those boundaries and expectations lie. Those expectations, making them explicit, is so key. So that was a long way of saying, one of the best ways. There's loads of other ways, but there's one of the great ways of building psychological safety is to create those scaffolds and make the previously implicit explicit, setting those expectations on the team.
When we want to create a shared understanding, I feel like systems thinking plays a very crucial role here. So how important for the psychological safety facilitator, or maybe a person who creates that environment, how important is systems thinking?
I think it's super important, and we address it. We dive into systems thinking and a lot of associated topics quite deeply in a lot of our advanced workshops and stuff. Because just like you say, there's the practical application of the behaviors and practices around psychological safety and that sort of side of things. But if you're at a leadership level, or in fact, no, if you're at any level of organization, but you're interested in the larger scale impact, application, and outcome of psychological safety in teams and organizations, then systems thinking is absolutely crucial. One of the basic tenets of systems thinking is that systems, including organizations and teams, right, are more than just a sum of their parts, right? You can imagine a car. If a car is completely dismantled and every single component is laid out on the ground, we still have a car, right? We've still got physically a car, but it's not going to work, because a system is made up of the connections and interactions between components, not just the components themselves. And if those interactions and connections aren't working properly, or aren't working as effectively as they could be, then the system is degraded. And that's kind of how you can think about a lack of psychological safety in a team or organization, because with a lack of psychological safety, we're inhibiting those connections and those interactions between the components. What sort of the next, where your thinking goes next from there is that those components aren't just individuals, units of people, divisible by indivisible units of people. They're also groups of people. So what's really interesting about it, so Google Project Aristotle talked about high performing teams, right? So Google Project Aristotle talked about the unit of delivery in an organization, I guess, is a team, and for a team to reach high performing state, we need to foster psychological safety. That's true, but it's no good, or at least it's not very good, just to have bubbled pockets of psychological safety, just as a few high performing teams and organizations, because teams don't work in isolation. Teams work with each other. Teams need to take instruction and work and value from somewhere else in the organization, do something with it, and then hand it off to somewhere else. Maybe that goes to the customer or the user, or maybe it goes to another team in the organization. Work and stuff, value flows around organizations like this. If we don't have psychological safety between people in different teams, those handoffs and the value flow, the flow of work, the flow of value between teams is inhibited. And so that's where we begin to see the harm caused to particularly large organizations, caused by a lack of psychological safety across and between teams. Now, this is obviously much more difficult to do because teams might be existing in different buildings, different sites, different states, different countries, different time zones. They may have very, very different contexts, very different ways of working. They may do completely different things with completely different skill sets. So it can be much harder to build those interactions and articulate those interactions between teams. But yeah, ultimately, and again, it's very, very context specific, right? Like what works for one organization isn't necessarily going to work for another. I really like the team API concept from team topologies. I think that's really, really powerful. But it doesn't apply in every context, or at least maybe it doesn't. Maybe it does. I'm not an expert. So, but I think systems thinking itself is really, really powerful. A really powerful way to look at organizational resilience and why and how psychological safety is so key, not just to high-performing teams, but to high-performing organizations as well. So yeah, and we could dive into all sorts of other stuff related to systems thinking, like Cynefin and resilience engineering and theory of constraints and all this other stuff that really leads to performance, right? But yeah, again, the foundation of it all is this sort of frictionless communication and interaction between components of a system, whether they're people or teams, people or groups of people.
So I think a common goal is vital for nurturing systems thinking. It optimizes the flow of communication.
I really, really want to go back to your point about the goal, because I'm just making a note of frameworks because I do want to come back to frameworks, but I really, really want to dive into your point about the goal because it's so you've hit on such an important piece, because we were just talking about individuals, right, and team charters, and so how important it is for a group of people to define their goal. And when we're looking at organizational level psychological safety and performance and systems thinking, it's important for all these teams to define their goals. But what we often, the challenge that we often hit is that teams don't always share the same goal, particularly in large organizations, particularly in organizations where they're very metric driven, where they're very driven by metrics and performance is measured by metrics and outputs and sort of sales made by the sales team, story points delivered by the software development team, engagements on social media from the marketing team. And at some point, someone's forgotten somewhere that this company is meant to be delivering, I don't know, mobile phones to people. And so we've particularly in large organizations, those goals are what's the word? Sort of broken down, decomposed to a point where the broader, wider goal is opaque, and it's a bit difficult to see how this team goal translates into this organization goal. And that's where a lot of this communication and friction, so the friction in communication can occur, because the teams may even have conflicting goals, but at least a lot of the case, they have goals that don't necessarily complement each other. For example, the sales team might be selling things that the software team can't deliver, or the or one team, and this comes back to the theory of constraints, right? One team might be churning through things, pushing them over to this team who can't handle that volume of work. So it looks like this team over here is low performing, but it's not. It's just that's the way the organization has been designed and the metrics have been designed around it. So yeah, so the goals and metrics and how we break down that organizational goal, decompose that into team goals, really, really powerful, really important for psychological safety. So I'm sorry for that diversion, but I thought what you said was so important.
Mm. So maybe you can just share insights about what are the frameworks available and how we can leverage those.
Yeah, so there's quite a lot of different frameworks around. I think it's kind of important here to distinguish between theoretical frameworks and practical application frameworks. And there are quite a few theoretical frameworks out there. There's the 4 stages framework, the 4 stages model of psychological safety, which I know there's like a lot of controversy around, and obviously all models are wrong and some are useful, and I think all these different models of psychological safety are useful as long as we don't accept them as gospel, as long as we don't accept them as like the truth.
Mm.
And they're all these models and frameworks are capable of evolving and changing over time in response to new information and new knowledge and new findings, so there's a lot of different models and frameworks out there. The theoretical models, such as the 4 stages, and I know Victor Sesson has a great model, and there's and some others have fallen out of my head, but they help us to think about psychological safety and help us to understand psychological safety and think about it in different ways. I tend to lean towards more sort of practitioner, sort of implementation and practice models. I guess that's because like I am an academic. I've got a couple of master's degrees, and I love studying and research. But primarily, like at my core, I'm a practitioner. I'm a doer, and I'm an operator. So I appreciate models that help me do something, help me act,
Mm.
do, change. And I really like frameworks based on sort of the Deming
Mm.
model of plan, do, check, act, or sort of PDCA cycle with it. It wasn't actually Deming that came up with that. I'm trying to, but the name is falling out of my head. I've sort of created this model, but it's not really, I wouldn't say it's my model. It's just a sort of riffing on Deming's model of acting, reflecting, and understanding, and a sort of study, build, maintain, measure sort of process where we need to study, we need to learn, we need to understand psychological safety first. Then we can do something around measurement.
Mm.
Now, that doesn't necessarily mean heavy-handed surveys and quantifiable metrics and all that stuff. Might just be asking questions, might just be having conversations, saying, do we feel psychologically safe in this team? How do we feel in this team? Where do we need to improve? That's as much measurement as I think is often necessary. Then we can look at building. What do we do? What do we change? What do we implement? What practices do we put in? What behaviors do we change, and things like that? What are we building? What are we doing? And we're looking at maintaining as well. So the reason maintain is in there as a explicit statement is because, and I see this in quite a lot of organizations, there's a tendency to sometimes, and this isn't just psychological safety, this is all sorts of stuff. We do one workshop, we do one seminar, one session, and then we're done. We've ticked that box, we can move on. That's not going to work. Like, it will have a positive impact, I'm sure. It's a good thing to do. But if we neglect the maintenance, maintenance often is not the sexy thing. We always want to be changing something and doing something new. Maintenance is the important one. Maintenance is where we stick with good behaviors and we get better over time, and when we make psychological safety a norm. So we need to go through to maintain and keep maintaining and look at how we maintain. And again, then we can sort of just flow back through the cycle: study, measure, build, maintain, study, measure, build, maintain. And part of that is acting, reflecting, and understanding. And so this is, that's not necessarily a proprietary framework or necessarily specific to psychological safety itself. and it's just a riffing on Deming's framework, really. So that's the way I sort of think about frameworks into psychological safety terms, separating them from the theoretical models of psychological safety and the practical application of, okay, right, how do we do this? What are we going to do next? That sort of framework. But yeah, I'm interested in your thoughts on that, really.
Yeah, so I just came across this psychological safety quadrants based on how we can create high performing teams. So how those that quadrants exercise is useful.
Oh yeah. So this is really useful. This is a model, or at least a sort of representation of psychological safety and team performance from Amy Edmondson's work. And so I was first introduced to psychological safety. I learned the term psychological safety by coming across a video of Amy Edmondson's where she did a talk, and she introduced this quadrant model, which is in the Fearless Organization book. It's on about page 13, I think. And it represents increasing psychological safety as we go up, and increasing. So I think in the first model, I think Amy uses the word accountability, I think, as you sort of go along the x-axis. But in subsequent models and subsequent changes, and this is why, I'm a big Amy Edmondson fan, and I think this is a great point about her work, is that it has evolved and it changed over time, right? And we look at something, we create it, we improve it over time. But subsequently, I think Amy's changed it to performance standards and some other terms. I sometimes use drive, like Daniel Pink's concept of drive, this autonomy, mastery, and purpose idea. But basically what we're talking about is increasing psychological safety along with the desire and ability to deliver results. And that's what makes a team, right? That's this team concept, this shared goal, and the desire to achieve that shared goal. If we have neither the drive nor psychological safety, and then a group of people is just apathetic. We no longer have the need or capability to deliver something, nor do we have the psychological safety to put our hand up and say we're not delivering anything. So teams get stuck there. They get stuck. Like there's no way out of the apathy zone unless something external changes or something else dramatic changes. If we increase the drive, the pressure to deliver, the need to deliver outcomes without increasing psychological safety, we simply veer into anxiety and stress and burnout. And that's a bad place to be, right? Because you lose people off the team, like partly because why would you stay on a team that's like that? So you might leave for another, but also people might leave through burnout and stress and go off on sick. And either of these things are bad for a team, right? If we look at the converse of that, if we increase psychological safety, but we don't have that drive, that desire, that ambition, then we're in a comfortable place. We're in a comfortable, happy place where we can be ourselves. We can be, we're happy to be on the team. We're comfortable being there, but we're not getting much done. But the advantage of this place, however, is that we do feel psychologically safe to put our hand up and say, we're not getting much done. We should probably do something about that. And so from there, we can move over into the performance zone where we build the capabilities, the desire to achieve, the practices and scaffolds and skills to deliver those results. And that's where we combine psychological safety and this drive to reach a high performance zone or the learning zone. I think it's, and it's harder to build psychological safety than it is to destroy it. It's hard to build and it takes time to build, but it's easily destroyed by, as my old manager 15 years ago used to do, walk into a room and just rip someone apart in public for some minor mistake. Because not only does that destroy the psychological safety of that individual, but it destroys the psychological safety of all the individuals who've seen it. And so, I think that's a really, really powerful model, really, really powerful framework, and it helps us understand the relationship between psychological safety and the capability and desire to achieve results and how they combine to reach performance. I should also point out, because sometimes, I use this workshop, I use this as a tool with teams, and everyone wants to move to the performance zone, right? like way up in that top right corner, which is great. But I think it's also wise, and it's okay to want to be in that comfort zone sometimes. Like I particularly recognized this about 8 months ago with the birth of my first child. Right, so after my first child was born, I was exhausted. I was tired. I was my whole life had been turned upside down. It was fantastic, but I was not in the performance zone work-wise.
Mm.
I needed to take my foot off the gas and sit back in that comfort zone. And in a psychologically safe, supportive team, that's okay. We can recognize that not everyone can be in that performance zone all the time. It's okay to sort of move back and forth between that. Even the whole team to move back into the comfort zone should they need to for some reason. Maybe there's some big organizational change or something or whatever. It's sometimes easier to take sprints and rest than it is to run a marathon, right? So we should consider that it's okay to take our foot off the gas every now and then.
Kaizen is all about the continuous improvement and the intent to add value in people's life. And what are the common mistakes people make when they're creating a psychological safe environment?
Oh, that's a good one. Common mistakes. I think so. There are common misconceptions, I think, which are that so some common misconceptions are things like that psychological safety is only about wellness and well-being, or it's about a safe space and things like that. There are some. I don't know about common mistakes. There are some. What we are fighting against is a century, pretty much, of learning, of a sort of instilling into us that Taylorism, scientific management, and sort of typical sort of authoritarian command control leadership is the way to performance. And that's very, very hard to shake off. Part of that, I think, is this interesting dynamic so most of us go through our lives having a series of managers above us, right? A series of leaders above us and managers. Often those managers directly above us are sort of only, say, one step ahead or a couple of steps ahead of where we are at the time. Now, that means most of the managers that we have through our careers, certainly in our early careers, are somewhat inexperienced managers. They're still, we're all still learning. We're obviously all still learning, and none of us are sort of perfect managers or bosses. But particularly in our early careers, we're exposed much more to inexperienced managers because management is a skill, it's a competency, it's a thing we can learn, it's a capability and that we can get better at. It's not something innate to certain special people. So what we do find is that we learn most of what we know about management from our own managers. Now we might learn, like I did, that is not a good way to manage people. But we learn a lot of not necessarily bad things, but not necessarily helpful or constructive things as well. We learn a lot of those behaviors and habits from our early managers, and that's not their fault. It's just a sort of perpetual cycle that we've got sort of stuck in, because it's only when we get up to where people have had a long time to learn and build the capability of management. It's only then that we learn, oh, this is really great management. But we're not often exposed to that very early on in our careers. We're very lucky if we are, in fact. And so, some people are lucky enough to have that. And there are some people who are maybe naturally, instinctively, better managers, but it is still a capability and a skill that we have to learn and work at and self-reflect and improve. So I think that's part of the challenge. We have to recognize that we're all on the journey. We're all, we're always walking the journey. We'll never get to that sort of utopian state. We should just constantly strive to get better.
Is there any specific advice for the leaders?
I think so. There's so many things leaders can do, and and I also like to make the point that, well, this is Grace Hopper's point. This isn't my point. Grace Hopper said, you manage things and you lead people. And so, step one is to recognize that people and things are different things, right? And what, we cannot treat people in the way that we might manage a process or a machine. And a lot of psychological safety damage is done by trying to do that, because also instinctively, that's often the way we've been taught and stuff like that. But I think, some of the most crucial stuff for leaders is also to find a great mentor and or coach. Find people find people with expertise and experience, and learn as much as we can from them. Find coaches who maybe they don't have the management and leadership expertise, but they're really fantastic coaches. They're great in helping us self-reflect, learn, understand our contexts, come up with our own answers. That's what coaches are really powerful at. That helps us build the capacity, the capability for self-reflection. Self-reflection, self-learning, learning about ourselves is one of the most powerful things a leader can do. And it's one of the skills that is most difficult and sometimes most uncomfortable to learn. Well, so that's kind of my big thing for leaders.
So I think the leader should have the coaching ability so that they can help the people to reflect and understand their potential. And I think there's a huge role for emotional intelligence for the people, right? So I think coaching plays a very crucial role to build that emotional intelligence of the people so that they can feel at home. I feel that psychological safety is feel at home. What do you think?
Yeah. It's feeling at home in the group. It's feeling at home in that context, and it's feeling at home in your own head. It's feeling like you're not trying to be someone else or somewhere else. Yeah, definitely. And emotional intelligence is such a key part of that. And this comes easier to some than others. But again, like anything, it's a skill, it's a capability that we can learn. And certainly things like coaching, self-reflection, meditation. A lot of these practices that might seem a bit sort of fluffy, a bit sort of, they're sometimes dismissed as a bit of a soft kind of thing. They're actually really, really powerful practices, and really, really, really impactful. Yeah.
Coaching with systems thinking, it's secret sauce for making the organization a safe environment so that people can feel at home. What is the most important thing you have learned in your professional journey?
Oh, wow. The most important thing I have learned. I'm going to regret this. I know I'm going to regret this because I can think of so many things. I can't think of one thing, but I'm going to say one thing because I'm going to commit to one thing. So let's think. So the most important thing is to reframe things that we're trying to do away from concrete objectives, and reframe them, redesign them as experiments, as things that we're going to learn from. Everything in life is a learning opportunity. And everything in life can be an experiment. The only experiment that fails is the one we didn't learn from. So whatever we're doing, and it might be something that is seemingly so crucial to get right, but it can still be an experiment. We can still fail in some small way and learn from it, because the most important thing is to learn how to get better at it next time. Whatever we're doing at work, we're probably going to do something, we're probably going to do it again, or we're going to do something like it again. So the most important thing is to learn how to do it better next time. Otherwise, we're just going to keep on doing the same old, and we're not going to get it, and we're not going to enjoy our work as much. So whether you're launching a spaceship to Mars, or you're launching an app, or you're saving lives, it's an experiment. What can we learn from how we did this time, and how can we learn how to do it better next time? I think that's the most important thing. So I think this experimental mindset brings more resilience in us,
and reflect in our action and creates a positive vibe environment. I feel, yeah, that's really great. And thank you so much, Tom, for your valuable time and sharing very insightful things to the listeners. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bala. Thank you. I really, really appreciate it. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any organization is a complex adaptive system whose fabric is nothing but the relationships and interactions between its people. The quality of thinking in individuals and the conducive systemic conditions to cultivate that clarity in those interactions make any organization a conscious one. Only when the parts of the system become more conscious, they can realize the sense of being with the wholeness, create a psychologically safe environment, and help each other to feel at home, the collective awareness of the entire system. Systems thinking plays an essential role to create this awareness and unlock the keys of Kaizen that we practice every day.